Before you buy your next iPad, you might genuinely want to pause for a moment. Because if Apple follows through on even half of what current leaks, supply chain chatter, and long-term strategic patterns are suggesting, the iPad Mini 8 could quietly become one of the most important small devices Apple has ever made and possibly the last truly traditional compact tablet in its lineup, which immediately raises the stakes around whether waiting is worth it or whether buying an existing model makes more sense right now. And to understand why this upcoming generation feels different, it helps to first ground ourselves in reality. Because Apple has not officially announced an iPad Mini 8, there has been no event invite, no teaser image, no product name confirmation, and no release date, so everything being discussed lives in the space between credible reporting, educated speculation, and Apple's own historical behavior. But while nothing is guaranteed, Apple is also one of the most pattern-driven companies in the tech world. And those patterns are becoming increasingly difficult to ignore when it comes to the future of the Mini, a device that has always occupied a strange but beloved niche. Because unlike every other iPad, the Mini is the one you can truly hold in one hand. Slip into a small bag, read comfortably on a plane, use on the couch without feeling like you're balancing a laptop. And that emotional attachment matters more than people often admit, which is why the silence surrounding the Mini since the iPad Mini 6 launched back in 2021 has been so noticeable, especially when you consider that Apple has refreshed the iPad Pro multiple times, reinvented the iPad Air with M-series chips, updated the entry-level iPad, and even experimented more aggressively with software features that blur the line between tablet and computer. While the Mini has remained largely unchanged, aging quietly in the background. And that stagnation has fueled the belief that the iPad Mini 8 is either going to be a dramatic reinvention or a subtle farewell. Because Apple rarely lets a product linger this long without a plan. And when it finally does move, it usually does so with intent. Which brings us to the design and display, an area where Apple can make the Mini feel new without completely redefining what it is. And according to the most consistent leaks, Apple is unlikely to radically alter the Mini's footprint, meaning no folding screens, no dramatic size jump, and no return of the home button. Instead, sticking with the flat-edge design language, compact proportions, and roughly 8-inch class size that makes the Mini feel like a large phone rather than a shrunken laptop. But within that familiar shape, Apple is expected to push the boundaries by shrinking bezels even further, increasing usable screen space without increasing overall size, potentially landing somewhere between 8.3 and 8.5 inches, which might sound minor on paper, but would make a meaningful difference in reading, multitasking, and drawing, especially when paired with a more refined display panel. And then there's the front-facing camera, an issue that many users have complained about for years, because on the current model, FaceTime calls in landscape mode always feel awkward, with your eyes drifting away from the camera, something Apple has already fixed on newer iPads by moving the camera to the long edge. And it would be genuinely surprising if the Mini 8 didn't finally receive this same treatment, instantly making video calls, remote work, online classes, and casual streaming feel far more natural. And while these design tweaks alone would modernize the Mini, the display technology itself is where expectations and reality collide. Because many fans are begging for old and 120Hz promotion, but Apple's display strategy has historically been cautious and hierarchical, reserving the most expensive and advanced panels for pro devices first, which makes OLED on a Mini far from guaranteed. Yet that doesn't mean the screen will remain unchanged. Because one of the biggest criticisms of the iPad Mini 6 was the jelly scroll effect, where text appears to wobble slightly during vertical scrolling due to uneven refresh behavior. And Apple has every incentive to eliminate that criticism through a redesigned display controller, improved panel uniformity, or even a higher refresh rate, whether that ends up being full promotion or a smarter adaptive solution. Because simply making the Mini scroll smoothly like a Pro model would dramatically improve the daily experience in silence, one of the loudest complaints surrounding the device. And then there's performance, the area where the iPad Mini 8 could truly redefine expectations for what a small tablet can be. Because right now the Mini runs on the 15 chip, which is still capable but clearly dated compared to Apple's current silicon and based on Apple's update cadence. And a 17 class chip feels like the bare minimum for the next generation, bringing major gains in CPU efficiency, GPU power, and machine learning performance. But there's a growing and increasingly plausible idea that Apple may skip the traditional A series upgrade entirely and move the Mini to an M series chip, especially now that the iPad Air and iPad Pro have already made that transition, because from Apple's perspective, maintaining multiple chip architectures across the iPad lineup adds complexity, and from a user perspective, an M series powered Mini would instantly become something entirely different. A truly pocketable computer capable of console-level gaming, advanced photo and video editing, pro-level music production, and desktop-class multitasking, all in a device that weighs less than a paperback book, which would make it uniquely appealing to students, travelers, creators, and power users who don't want to carry a laptop or even a larger iPad. And when you layer that potential performance leap with Apple's continued push toward more capable software, including Stage Manager, external display support, and increasingly Mac-like app experiences, the Mini 8 starts to look less like a casual consumption device and more like a stealth productivity machine, especially if Apple addresses other long-standing limitations such as base storage, because the current 64 GB starting point feels painfully outdated in a world where apps, games, photos, and offline content consume space rapidly, making a 128 GB base configuration feel almost inevitable, especially given Apple's recent moves across other product lines, and connectivity improvements also feel likely, with faster USB-C speeds, improved external accessory support, and a more efficient 5G modem aligning with Apple's broader ecosystem upgrades, while camera improvements, though unlikely to be headline-grabbing, will almost certainly bring better sensors, improved low-light performance, and refined center stage behavior that keeps users framed naturally during calls. And then there's Apple Pencil support, which could be one of the most quietly transformative upgrades if the Mini 8 supports the newer Apple Pencil Pro, because features like squeeze gestures, haptic feedback, and barrel rotation would turn the Mini into an incredibly compelling digital notebook and sketchpad, particularly for artists, designers, and students who value portability above all else. And yet, looming over all of these potential upgrades is the uncomfortable strategic question of whether the iPad Mini even fits into Apple's long-term vision, because there have been increasing reports of Apple experimenting with foldable devices in the 8 to 10-inch range, something that could either replace the Mini outright or become its spiritual successor. And if that's the case, the iPad Mini 8 could represent a turning point, either as the last traditional Mini Apple ever makes or as the version where Apple finally embraces the form factor fully and elevates it to flagship status to coexist alongside future foldables, which makes this generation feel especially significant, because it's not just about incremental upgrades, but about defining what the Mini is meant to be going forward. And that context directly informs the buying decision facing consumers right now. Because if you need a compact tablet immediately and find a good deal on the current iPad Mini, it remains a solid and enjoyable device. But if your use case allows you to wait and your curiosity is piqued by smoother scrolling, dramatically better performance, improved cameras, expanded storage, and deeper Apple Pencil integration, then holding off could be the smarter move. Because if Apple delivers even half of what the leaks and patterns suggest, the iPad Mini 8 won't just be another refresh. It will be the most capable small tablet Apple has ever created, potentially redefining what a truly portable computer can be. And whether it ends up being the beginning of a new era for the Mini or the final evolution of a beloved form factor, it's shaping up to be one of the most interesting Apple products on the horizon, which is why so many people are watching closely, speculating endlessly, and debating whether this will finally be the moment when the Mini stops feeling like the forgotten iPad and starts feeling like the most intentional one.